The Imperial Palace on Terra, the most famous location in all of Warhammer, is not looking so good. It's currently in about 1 million pieces. Up here we've got some massive battlements, nothing like a huge gatehouse, a big old trench, walls. There really are a lot of walls. And there's about 1 zillion road tiles, ruins, buildings, and guns. But there is one thing missing. Usually in these intros, I'll now smash out this kind of huge list of all the various parts of the palace we'll be working on, but it's a bit more simple this time. We're just building one thing, one really massive thing, and when it's done, this will be an Imperial Palace the Emperor can be proud of.
Over the last 7 videos, yes, 7, we have built a monster, adding more and more and more to the Imperial Palace. But the last video was a real milestone. We finally finished the main structure of this first region of the palace. We can really start to see the shape of the build come together, the ruined city sector, the lower city and the upper city all interconnected, with the final bridge and the third trench joining our 2 upper battlements into one cohesive battleground. But it still didn't feel epic enough. When people look at this board and walk around it, I want them to be blown away. I want to capture that sense of awe that I got when I saw the amazing centerpiece at Warhammer World, or when I pore over the immersive Siege of Terra artwork of Neil Roberts, and it became very obvious very quickly what my Imperial Palace was missing.
It's time to build the biggest tower that Warhammer has ever seen.
When I built the third trench, I made some lovely chamfered structures to form the pillars of our bridge supports, and my plan is to have these rise into the sky into an absolute behemoth of a towered bastion that anchors the rear corner of the build to create this amazing centerpiece and backdrop for the rest of the board that will even have accessible areas for gameplay some 3 meters above the board. But my first job is to begin at the base and shore up the foundations of our mighty tower.
But we've hit our first hurdle. I'm basically out of foam.
A quick road trip to Christchurch to pick up a whole bunch of different sized sheets of extruded polystyrene, and there is just no better feeling than a carload of foam deploying into the workshop. Look at all that delicious orange goodness. Then I grabbed the back corner of the board and separated it out from the rest of the palace to make working on this piece a bit easier, and then grabbed my huge thick sheet of foam and carved up 4 monstrous pillars. I scored in a brickwork pattern the same as the pillars from the lower level, and then got to texturing them, and man, I just love this thicker foam sheeting. It's glorious to cut and shape, and it takes texture from foily and bricky just so well. Apart from a general rocky finish, it's also important to round off the hard edges of the foam to make it really read like weathered stone and not freshly cut polystyrene. With all 4 looking really nice, I whacked them into place, and my goodness, this thing is going to be huge, maybe too huge actually. I was originally just going to have a tower on top of these 4 pillars, but then I had this idea to use this structure to hint at even more upper levels of the palace beyond this piece, and to make something really special. So I decided I would have the bridge tower as the front corner of a much bigger structure that jutted backwards from the pillars and across our chasm behind it. To build out the new side walls of this mega bastion, I grabbed some 20mm unskinned foam and cut a sheet that was as high as the lower pillar height, and then textured the Emperor out of it. I'm building this entire tower in 2 kind of modular sections so that it will be fully removable for storage and transport, and it's also going to open up some pretty interesting modularity options.
Just a quick shout out to my mate Con's new sort of like social networking app for finding other wargamers. That's called VoxLink. All the links are down in the description. You guys have probably heard me talk about it before. It's awesome. So you want to find games, get on VoxLink, go check it out. Even for me, I think this might be too tall. I was gonna whack a platform on top of this and then build up the kind of upper element of the bastion, but it's gonna be not just probably touching the roof, but you're not even gonna see it when you're playing on the board underneath. It's gonna be so high. So I think I'm gonna shorten these pillars and then build up the rest of the bastion.
With the pillars cut down, I set about texturing even more foam sheeting to make up the remaining height of the side walls of the bastion supports, and gluing these in place was a bit tricky because of course we can't glue these sheets to the level below, as we want that level to be our kind of modular break-off point. So instead, I just pinned everything in place with skewers and then glued the sheets to the upper structure with a bunch of liquid nails. This is all looking a bit rubbish at the moment, but it's about to all come together with the addition of some sweet looking archers. I just love the bridge span on the level below, and I love the idea of repeating that motif up the bastion, so I carved a nice archway into more 20mm XPS and then beveled the edge and carved in a really quite detailed brickwork pattern. I like to create a contrast in brickwork styles across various sections of the build. The more structural something is, like the larger the stones are, right, to hold the weight, to bear the load, but if a piece is more decorative, I'll do a finer grain of brickwork. I decided for even more detail that a double layer of beveled arches was the way to go, and glued those in on the front and back of the tower, and then fell in love with the aesthetic so much that I decided to create the exact same thing for the two sides between the pillars, but with like a much thinner arch profile. I even got suckered into doing double layered archways here as well. It just looks really cool. And after a bunch of finicky repositioning, I managed to get all of these elements glued together looking pretty straight. That's the core structures complete, and the next step is just a really finicky stage of adding in heaps of decorative finishing foam, long stripping and chamfered detailing supports, which blend all of the large structures together and make them feel like a more kind of cohesive piece of architecture rather than just sheets of foam glued together. They add a huge amount to the piece, both inside and outside the archways, because of course, this piece needs to be totally interiored. We can see inside the faces of every foam sheet through each of the archways. I really feel like we're onto something here, and I've got some pretty big ideas about where the rest of this lower bastion can go, but we're gonna start with the lower battlements. And our first job is to finish mounting our two massive Titan armaments, the kind of centerpiece of these lower battlements that we started in the last video. I've already made the two firing platforms using some awesome pieces donated by Neil Kirkley from the UK, but to get these massive laser turrets mounted to the platforms, I ripped into my latest care package from the magnabaron.com, your one-stop shop for all things wargaming magnets. The Magna Baron has sent me just a huge range of magnets of different sizes, perfect for just about every wargaming project possible, and when I built my two massive Titans, I'd already magnetized all the weapons and the mounts and the options, so the laser turrets already have their magnabaron.com magnets. I just need to mount a magnet in the platforms.
Holy shit, these are strong.
I found the perfect little Mechanica scenery detail to glue the magnet into using some gel superglue from Deluxe Materials, and then the plastic glue to mount that detail piece to the platform, and then once that had fully cured, kaboom, look at these turrets. We've got full rotation, and the massive Titan gun isn't going to go anywhere, which is a real testament to the strength of the magnet, because these laser turrets are heavy and really badly balanced at the mounting point.
If you need magnets for your wargaming, then look no further than the magnabaron.com, your DIY super magnet home. Magnabaron.com have a huge range of wargaming magnets which are super powerful, and even have specific kits for notoriously difficult to magnetize models, magnetized movement trays, and magnetized collapsible flight stands for the epic travel wargaming experience. I challenge you to find a better feeling in all of wargaming than the pure bliss of this moment. Magnetic perfection. So to score some boss wargaming magnets for all your army needs, hit up the magnabaron.com, link down in the description, so go and show him some love.
The newly magnetized laser turrets look awesome, and I originally designed this platform to just mount on the wall as is, but as I dreamt of building out these battlements, I decided some real centerpiece emplacements could give these long flat wall stretches a nice focal point, so I began to carve up a series of foam structures to form an elevated strong point that our turret can rest on. A range of different brickwork shapes and chamfered sloping surfaces added a bunch of interest and tied this piece to the overall architecture, and it also gave me a great leaping off point to continue the rest of my battlement, using the tried and true method from the earlier parts of the build, using the epic scale Civitas kits. I assembled a strip of low walls with a floor panel to span the gap between the emplacement and the tower pillar, and then hung them out over the edge so that I could create a ramped machicolation to hang out over the trench. This whole battlement now needs a pass of intense detailing with extra weapons and power cables and little greeblies everywhere, but I'm happy with it for now, so I jumped on over to the other side of the trench and knocked up a similar set of defenses, building another emplacement for the second laser turret. But then when it came to the long battlement, the span of the walls here is much longer, so I added a little elevated detail just for some visual interest, which will be a jumping off point for some extra details and armaments in the future. Although such a long span of wall, the slope machicolations do really look fantastic. Then I decided before we moved to the upper platform and the tower above, I was instead going to add some more detail to this lower bastion, so I summoned my horde of scenery bits that I've accumulated across the project and rummaged for inspiration. We're going to need a way for troops to access the upper rampart, so I decided that each of these pillars should have an elevator, just like a lot of other areas in the build, so I used some of the old Cities of Death doorways to make some elevator access hatches, trimming the detail down on the back so that they glue nicely in place, and then to blend those into the structure, I built a little trim out of foam as well as some skirting and added this on both sides, which I think really reads quite nicely. And then I took all of those pillar offcuts that I'd saved when cutting down our tower pillars earlier and sliced them in half and mounted them on the other stone wall next to the gates, and then this big structural support now runs up the entire side of the lower bastion.
Man, it has been a hard couple of weeks. Winter has arrived and it is freezing in this workshop, and carving foam in the cold is not ideal. It's like 2 degrees in here at the moment, and the last couple of videos haven't done that well. Minas Tirith just did terribly, and the last Palace video didn't do that well either. We had a nice run of videos, and now I'm kind of worried that the wheels are falling off again. It's just this roller coaster of YouTube. The last video didn't kind of have enough of a kind of completionist vibe, a nice through line. This piece is really cool, so it should have a nicer journey for you guys, and I think you'll enjoy it. But if you're sick of Palace, let me know, and I've got another fully finished Middle-earth video ready to go. Here's a little update for all of you Middle-earth fans. It's looking absolutely gorgeous. I've done heaps since you've seen it, but if you haven't seen either of the last 2 videos, go and check them out. They'll be linked down below. Even if the views are terrible, my patrons, you guys are amazing. To reward you guys is we're gonna do up some gorgeous, sexy banners on both the Imperial Palace and over on Minas Tirith, kind of draping down the walls. In universe, these banners would be honoring the Emperor, but at Zorpazorp, they're gonna be honoring my almighty Patreons, and I'm gonna have all of their lovely names printed up on some big kind of sexy Gothic style looking banners all over the walls and the walls of Minas Tirith. So if you want your walls on the Zorpazorp mega builds, go and check out Patreon, link down below. You patrons, I just love you guys. And go and comment down below. What do you want? Do you want more Palace, or do you want me to jump back to Middle-earth? Because you guys make the decisions around here so that I don't have to.
Now, there is one really important architectural feature that is just so iconic across all Imperial Palace imagery, and that is of course the flying buttress, and they are absolutely perfect to emphasize this visual focal point of our sprawling landscape. So I grabbed some more 70mm XPS foam and started having a play with some ideas on how they would work, settling on a simple square form pillar to match our main tower, and then a crossed beam with some vertical brick detail and a gentle chamfer on all sides to soften the hard lines. I pinned the first one in place and mounted it to the bastion foundation, and then also to the side of the arch tower, and I'm not really sure where looks better, so I grabbed some more foam and I knocked up a second flying buttress, an exact copy of the first, and then had a huge play with all of our different configuration options. Should I mount the buttress to the bastion, the tower, or potentially carve 2 more and mount them everywhere?
So this is mental hard. I have no idea what I like more. I think all of the options look really cool, and in the spirit of me not making any decisions, I have posted photos in my Patreon Discord, and I'm gonna let the Patreons decide because I have no idea what looks better.
The Zorpazorp Patreons in their almighty wisdom voted for me to make an extra 2 flying buttresses, so I experimented with some options for radically changing the form of the buttresses before deciding just to simply carve 2 more that were almost identical, just with a slightly longer angled arm span to create the perfect separation of the pillars for optimal gameplay, and then set them up in place, and I'm really happy with that decision. These buttresses mark a real milestone in the build because we are now completely leaving behind the phase of structural foam carving. First, I carved a couple of small strips of foam work with a gentle chamfer to accent the base of the laser turret bastion. Then I grabbed some 20mm foam sheet and carved just some simple tiered plinths to become the bases of our flying buttresses. This also gives them a little height boost, and it created a bit more shape and detail down in the playable zone of that upper board. Next, I grabbed the last of our pillar offcuts from the very start of the video and modified them into some really thick supports with, again, that nice classic chamfer tapering downwards, and glued them up at the top of the lower bastion, ready to support our upper level, and add a little bit of extra visual detail to those kind of flat wall panels. Then I grabbed a 10mm sheet of foam and cut some really nice thin strips with a simple brickwork pattern using my scalpel, pencil, and just a bunch of texturing with alfoil, and then cut and glued those in place across the top of the sloping arms of our 4 flying buttresses to begin adding detail to these mighty wings of Imperial fortification. Now, no flying buttress is complete, of course, without some curved inner arching, so I used the lid of my bin to mark out the perfect curve into some 20mm sheet and carved in a simple but kind of elegant brickwork pattern to emphasize that curved shape, and then glued those in place on all 4 of our buttresses, as well as adding a piece of vertical stripping that continued that curved detail piece down the pillar of the buttresses. Now, this episodic series of the Imperial Palace uses basically the same title each video, which works super well to program the algorithm to show it to you guys who've enjoyed the project, but I've seen in the comments it can get a bit confusing to keep track of what you have and haven't seen, so I've made some sexy changes for you guys. First, the titles and thumbnails of every older video have been updated with an episodic number, and I've put them all in a playlist on my homepage in episode order, so go and check that out if you've missed any updates, or even better, jump back to the start and binge the whole series so far. With the buttress structure looking grand, we need some really sexy details for the top of the pillars, so I grabbed my plastic Civitas spire kits and glued together 4 kind of square mini bastions, and then glued those onto a series of foam plinths that taper out from the width of our foam pillar down to the size of the plastic kit, and help to kind of blend the 2 layers of foam and plastic together. I then added some little plastic mini flying buttresses, tiny versions of their massive foam counterparts, and used those to kind of bridge the gap between our plastic and foam layers. I then assembled 2 octagonal and hexagonal tower floors, and then a lancing spire roof for each buttress, and glued them on top to complete a lovely spiky lethal buttress topper, and glued them all into place, and my goodness, we are truly getting somewhere now. Our final detail is to add the foundation of our upper level, and to get easy access to the top of the structure, I literally activated floor hammer mode, doing away with the tables and just plonking the foundation like right on the studio floor, and then jump back to my desk to cut and texture a stone bulwark to kind of run around the top rim of our structure. I opted for a nice thick set layer of stone. It just sort of fit the aesthetics of the structure really nicely, and it will also allow me to mount foam panels behind it and allow the piece to create a natural kind of battlement for any upper level work. I gave the pieces a nice chamfer to bleed down into the bastion forms below, and I'm just thrilled with how this beast has come together. Now, obviously, we still need to build the entire top of this tower bastion, but as a reward for you guys, and to hit that completionist high, I gave this lower level a prime and slapped it all together on top of its massive trench we've already built, and I cannot wait to make this beast even bigger, and to add it to the rest of the board to see just how big the Imperial Palace truly is now, but for that, we'll just have to wait until next time. Thanks for the support, guys. I cannot wait to bring you more Zorpazorp Imperial Palace.